Hi, welcome to the Times of Israel's Daily Briefing. It is Monday, October 20th, and I'm Jessica Steinberg. I'm speaking today with diplomatic correspondent Lazar Berman and deputy diplomatic reporter Nava Freiberg. Welcome to you both.
Good morning.
Good morning, Jessica.
Hi there. It is day 745 of the war. 2 soldiers were killed by Palestinian operatives in Rafah, Gaza on Sunday morning. Their names are Major Yaniv Kula, he was 26, and Staff Sergeant Itai Yavetz, 21. It was the first deadly incident for the IDF in Gaza since the start of the ceasefire, which is now a week old. It was obviously 6 days old yesterday. Following that incident, the Air Force and ground troops carried out strikes in the area. Hours later, Israel said it was resuming the ceasefire. We'll talk about that, the implications of the attack, and we'll also look at what US Envoy Steve Witkoff and Jared Kushner said on 60 Minutes, which was broadcast last night in the US. And of course, Witkoff and Kushner landed in Israel this morning. We don't know what's unfolding yet from that meeting and visit, but we'll talk about what we do know. So stay with us. Okay, Lazar, let's start with you. Let's talk about the attack yesterday and, of course, its implications for the ceasefire. If you want to go back first, or where do we stand now? Take it from what makes sense to you.
Sure, let's talk about the attack. This took place, I think first, it's important to emphasize that it took place on the Israeli side of the yellow line. The yellow line is the withdrawal line where IDF troops redeployed to a week ago. So this is in Israeli-controlled territory where there are almost no Palestinian civilians. It was certainly a deliberate attack. According to the IDF, the Hamas terrorists emerged from a tunnel, fired an RPG at engineering equipment, like a bulldozer or some sort of digger. I'm not sure exactly what the difference is, but one of the pieces of engineering equipment that has been very critical in this war, it has been in short supply, but they're working on destroying Hamas infrastructure, especially tunnels, which is permitted under the ceasefire. That struck one of these vehicles, and there was additional attacks at the same time. There was sniper fire that hit another one, and another RPG fired. The 2 soldiers, one an officer, one a staff sergeant, were from the active duty Nava Brigade from the 932 Battalion. So these are not reservists, these are active duty troops. And then 3 more were injured. So this is a very, very serious incident. I remind you that this takes place after a series of violations by Hamas. Okay, so Trump's program, his proposal that we've been talking about for a while now, had 20 points. Only 2 of the points have been implemented, and they're both Israeli concessions. Number 1, Israel gave back 250 hardened terrorists and 1,700 other detainees. And Israel is not pursuing the emigration, whether it's by force or by choice, of Gazans from Gaza. All the other 18 clauses in this agreement have not been implemented, certainly not in their entirety. Now, one of them, a very important one, is that in addition to the 20 living hostages, Hamas committed within the first 72 hours to release all of the 28 slain hostages that it's able to in the first 72 hours. It did not do that. It only started releasing hostages after those 72 hours. Israel is convinced in every sort of way, and you hear every official that knows anything about this say this, that Hamas absolutely not only knows where they are, but they actually have more bodies that they can release, and they're playing with the releases. And so far, have only released 12 of the 28, so 16 remains. Not even the majority have been released. They, of course, have to disarm. Now, that's not part of the first phase. That's part of the second phase, but they're certainly walking around. They've put their uniforms back on because the fighting's done for now, and they're shooting Palestinian civilians in the street. So they don't seem like they believe that they've surrendered. They certainly don't feel like they're scared of having to give up power in the second phase. This is very worrying, very critical for the future of the ceasefire. Now, it's important to note Israel's reaction. Of course, there was fury after soldiers were killed, and this, of course, comes after the violations with the lack of return of the hostage bodies. The IDF responded. It was not anything that changed the situation dramatically. There were strikes. Many of them were lethal, but it's nothing that's going to change the way Hamas is thinking. Hamas can certainly absorb that. They've done so for the past 2 years. There was no ground maneuver. There was no instructions to civilians who just returned home to leave again. So this was just a few hours of attacking. Even the threats that Israel sounded through various, unnamed officials, and some official statements as well, that they were not going to open the Rafah crossing today, that they were going to pause the introduction of humanitarian aid. Within an hour, they had gone back on that, and that clearly is under U.S. pressure. So the U.S. is convinced that this ceasefire is more likely to hold as long as they keep pushing it forward to try to ignore or to paper over Hamas violations. And you even heard Trump saying that the terrorists that carry this out seem to be quote unquote rebels within Hamas. And maybe the leadership didn't even know about this. So that's Trump's conviction. And that's why you have his top aides coming here this week.
When was it decided that they would come? When was that announced that they were on their way?
So this has been something that was initially leaks over the weekend. And then as the ceasefire continued to fray, it became more and more pressing and more details came out. So not only do you have Kushner and Witkoff, who landed an hour ago, you have Vice President J.D. Vance coming tomorrow. So it seems to be a 48-hour visit. So these are absolutely the big guns of the Trump administration. Short of Trump itself, these are people he trusts. These are people that everyone knows speak for him. And their main mission here is to make sure the ceasefire doesn't fall apart and to push everything forward as much as possible so they can get to talking about the second phase, which is going to even be way more difficult than the first phase, which we already see is no simple matter at all.
How do you think today will unfold, Lazar, then, in terms of, I'm not asking about Gaza because obviously that's kind of hard to know, but in terms of the Witkoff-Kushner visit, obviously they're going to sit down with Netanyahu. What else do you envision happening today?
So I envision things being pretty quiet. We don't want any surprises from the Israelis don't want any surprises with these two senior officials here. That would not look very good. That would certainly add stress where there doesn't need to be. So humanitarian aid will start going in. We expect the Rafah crossing to open to people, not to goods. And of course, the meetings with all the top officials, which are going to be very serious and real working meetings where Israel will, I expect, explain how disconcerting it is that they don't believe Hamas about the inability to return the hostage bodies and how problematic all of these violations and moving around of armed Hamas terrorists are. So I assume Dermer will be there, Eyal Zamir, the IDF chief of staff, David Zinni, the head of the Shin Bet. So it's going to be the senior security officials and Netanyahu's trusted advisors, who we know, Dermer, Ophir Falk, and those types. So it's going to be serious meetings. And hopefully the Americans will understand that they should stop talking about the war being over. And they should stop making excuses for Hamas and keep the threat of a renewed IDF operation hovering over Hamas's head. And that's what peace through strength means. And that's something that Trump emphasized during his Knesset visit last week. But he has not necessarily been acting like that in the days since.
Okay. Thanks for that, Lazar. We're going to take a quick break. When we're back, we'll talk to Nava about what Steve Witkoff and Jared Kushner had to say on 60 Minutes yesterday. So stay with us. Okay, Nava. So 60 Minutes, Steve Witkoff and Jared Kushner, a pair that we've gotten used to seeing together now in the last weeks, even months. And they spoke primarily about this ceasefire and this deal and how important it is to them, how important it is for the future of the Middle East, the role that they see Israel having to play in the ceasefire, and Hamas as well. What were some of the messages that really stood out for you as you were, looking over this and reporting on it?
So beginning with sort of the most immediate steps, Kushner did emphasize that the U.S. believes that Hamas is acting in good faith in terms of, trying to remain committed to at least, returning the bodies of the remaining deceased hostages, and that overall, he sort of contrasted the Israeli narrative that Hamas is deliberately delaying the process. He said they're really right now focusing on pushing both sides, Israel and Hamas, to stay proactive rather than blaming the other for violating the ceasefire or causing problems. And so that's sort of where the main immediate focus is on. And then in terms of, like you said, moving on to the next stages of the deal and where that's headed, Kushner said that the post-war sort of phase of the deal, and he also said, he called it, now that the war's over is what he said. So again, it ties back to what Lazar was saying about that US message that we're really moving past the war. He's saying now that the war's over, one thing he emphasized was that if Israel wants to integrate into this sort of broader Middle East normalization strategy, then they need to ensure Palestinian prosperity and that Palestinian people can thrive and do better, he said. And he said that they're focused on creating a situation where that happens while, ensuring there's joint security and economic opportunity for both Israelis and Palestinians. But he remained vague on Palestinian statehood. He didn't, which is kind of what the framework itself does. It says that it's, it'll open a path to Palestinian self-determination and statehood, but it's that game that we keep playing, obviously, because Israel is not interested, and Benjamin Netanyahu has openly said, he's not interested in a Palestinian state, whereas that's like the key goal for the Arab side and Palestinian side. So he remained vague on that and said, what you would end up calling that situation of Palestinian prosperity over time is will allow the Palestinians to determine that for themselves. But in general, he's talking about trying to maintain cooperation and proactivity from both sides in the short and the long term. Witkoff said a lot of interesting things.
What stood out for you?
So one thing I'll just start with maybe is, they're talking obviously about how the sort of behind the scenes of the deal and how the momentum built. And we had this reported last week because they published a clip of the interview ahead of the full airing of the interview. And so we reported this already, but he mentioned the strike in Qatar, Israel's strike on September 9th against Hamas leaders in Doha, which failed to kill the leaders that they were attacking, but it did, according to Witkoff, lead to a breakthrough in the Gaza deal. And he really highlighted Netanyahu's apology to the Qatari prime minister, which Netanyahu made side by side with Trump in the Oval Office.
And he did this in the 60 Minutes interview. He spoke about that.
Yeah. He mentioned the strike, and he talked about, he mentioned that the Americans felt a little bit betrayed by Israel's decision to strike, and that they didn't receive, they notified them, but it wasn't a meaningful advance notice of the strike. And so, he openly said that they felt a bit betrayed. And Trump at the time expressed, that he wasn't happy about the strike. And he said that, obviously after that strike, Qatar refused to continue acting as a mediator between Israel and Hamas. And this apology that eventually, Trump was able to get from Netanyahu to the Qatari prime minister convinced Qatar to rejoin mediation and really paved the way for the broader acceptance of the plan. And so both Kushner and Witkoff really emphasized that apology was an essential part of this. And they even said, it led to this trilateral mechanism that Trump announced between Israel, Qatar, and the US. And he said, I think Qatar could actually turn out to be, they could be incredible allies in the region, Israel and Qatar. And so it gives you a lot of insight, which is very interesting in and of itself.
Did they speak about that they were coming here today? Did they mention that at all?
From what I recall, I don't remember if they specifically mentioned their trip to the region. I think that the interview, I don't know if the exact day when the interview was filmed was shared. It might have been Friday. It might have been before that. So it was, believe it was before the visit was publicized. So I don't think they mentioned it, but I could be mistaken, but I don't think so. And no, it was more talking about the lead up to the deal and sort of where they see things going.
Right. Nava, I know that Steve Witkoff has spoken about that he really connected with Hamas leader Khalil al-Khaya because they both lost a child. And I'm wondering if that came up and if you got a sense of how that connection has helped them in terms of brokering the ceasefire.
So, connecting with him is, I don't remember the precise word he used, but obviously this is a very sort of gray area when it comes to these negotiations. But Witkoff, he spoke a lot about the meetings behind the scenes and their tactics and their experiences. And one thing that's interesting, just in terms of before we even get to what his interaction and his, quote unquote connection with Al-Khaya was, he said they were really determined to see the ceasefire through, and they described how Trump approved direct talks with Hamas in Egypt in order to make sure that the talk could go through.
The unusual step of approving.
Right, because they understood that they felt this was really the only way that it would get achieved. And so, like you mentioned, a large part of what they reveal in their interview in terms of how they got these negotiations done was that they're obviously these big real estate giants and businessmen, and they have a lot of they use a lot of the personal connection and at times, which we'll get to, vulnerability with the people that they're talking to and negotiating with in order to make that, build trust and to really gain momentum, which obviously we see was successful in the end. But he talks about this meeting with the senior Hamas official, Khalil Al-Khaya, who was this exiled Hamas leader that Israel tried to target in their Doha strike, but failed to, it wasn't a successful strike. But actually in that strike, Israel inadvertently killed the son of Al-Khaya. And so Witkoff said that when they were sitting in that room with the meeting with Hamas leaders in Sharm el-Sheikh last week in Egypt, that he mentioned to him that his own son, Andrew, who died when he was 22, sort of put them in this awful club of parents who have lost children. And that Kushner in the interview said how he saw this interaction between them and how suddenly it sort of switched from this hardline negotiation kind of atmosphere to people almost being vulnerable and being empathetic. Of course, they were careful to emphasize you're talking about people who green-lighted the October 7th massacre of, invading and murdering and killing innocent civilians. And so they weren't trying to in any way paint them, I think, in this sort of sympathetic light. But it does show in terms of their negotiation tactics and also, their character as people that this was definitely something that played a part, it seems, in getting all these deals to come through, was, building that personal connection and, the trust over time.
It sounds like a fascinating interview. I am going to put it on my list of things to view over the next couple of days. So thank you, Nava, for offering some of the highlights. And of course, we'll link to the article that we have written about it as well. The ceasefire, may it hold, and figuring out what are their next steps. So thank you to Nava and Lazar for being on today's daily briefing and telling us a little bit more about it.
Thanks, Jessica.
Thank you.
And thanks to you for listening to the Times Visual's Daily Briefing. Stay tuned for tomorrow's installment. This episode is produced by the Podwaves. Any comments you have, you can always email us, podcast@timesvisual.com. Until next time, take care and be well.